Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Uriah, along with Christopher Kline. We got a special guest tonight. Music's acting weird. I'll just cut it off. Anyway, we got a special guest tonight for our podcast. You might have read his stuff on Bleacher Report. Obviously, Forbes. He's the co-host of the NBA podcast. We want to welcome to the podcast the Sixers Sense, Bryan Toporek. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you, Bryan. Thanks for coming on. We're going to talk the past couple of Sixers games as well as some broader stuff about the team. But we're going to jump in with the Lakers game. That was kind of the premier primetime game from this past week. A bit of a weird one, as things tend to be with Philly. For long stretches of that game, it seemed like Philly had it in hand. And then, of course, we get to the end of the fourth quarter, and in pretty epic fashion, they collapse. And they go to overtime. They went overtime very convincingly, but probably shouldn't have gotten there. 38 points for Joel, 33 and 7 steals for D'Anthony Melton, probably the best game of his career individually. 28 points and 12 assists for James Harden, though not everyone was super thrilled with certain parts of his game. What were some of your broad takeaways from that one, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, I was encouraged by the way Embiid in particular came out in the first quarter. I think he had 20 points in the quarter to tie the Lakers as a team. Drew those 3 early fouls on AD, which, given how the game played out, probably was the difference between them winning when losing that game. Because when AD came back in the second quarter without Embiid, and the Lakers immediately went on a run and erased the early double-digit lead that they got out to. But I know Embiid after the game, kind of said he came out hot because he wanted to send a message to his teammates, which I thought was pretty interesting. We've often said that the team kind of lives or dies with Joel, and you would hope that, in theory, this is the deepest team he's ever been on. So you would hope that, especially in the regular season, you could buy him more time off, where if he has an off night, it's okay because James Harden picks the team up, or Tobias Harris picks the team up, or Tyrese Maxey, when he comes back, he can anchor the team for a night. We haven't quite seen that play out yet. I mean, they're not fully healthy. Maxey and George Niang missed that game against the Lakers, but very encouraged by Joel in that game. And then we'll talk about what he did against Charlotte as well. And you brought up D'Anthony Melton. Earlier in the week, I wrote a piece on Forbes about the best under the radar moves of the offseason, like Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert and DeJounte Murray, all these big name stars changed teams. And, there are a lot of guys who also changed teams, but didn't draw as many headlines. Melton was one of them. And we've seen, thanks to the injuries to Harden and Maxey, just how perfect of a fit he is on this Philly squad. When Maxey is healthy, I imagine he's going to go back to the bench, although it's just the more he plays with the starters, it is harder and harder to imagine moving him out of the starting lineup. He's going to play a ton of minutes for this team. He is the perfect connective tissue that they've lacked. They just haven't had a two-way guy like this. So, career high 8 threes, career high 7 steals. You're not going to bank on that every night, but man, I mean that, I know Daryl Morey has caught some flack from certain sections of Sixers fans this year. I don't think anyone can pan the D'Anthony Melton acquisition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Embiid was hot early and actually stayed hot pretty much all night. It was weird because Sixers got off to a really good start. Lakers were ice cold, and they made a run. And some guy named Austin Reeves, right? Austin Reeves came out of nowhere. I think he watched Invincible. Vince Papali. He just got inspired and dropped 25 on us. But I just want to piggyback, Bryan, on D'Anthony Melton. Look, I think, like you said, he's the great fit for this team. To see him defensively do what he does day in and day out for this team is remarkable and more than necessary, considering Thibault was that role player to make all those defensive plays the past few seasons. And now he's, pretty much stuck on the bench or at least losing minutes because of Melton. But I think I read a stat somewhere, guys, that Melton is the first player in NBA history since Michael Adams. I think he was like a 5'7" guard from the 90s, played for the Denver Nuggets, to ever get 30 points in a game, 8 3-pointers, and 7 steals. So we got a guy on our team, we got for a great steal. Thank you, Daryl Morey, from Memphis, because I guess Chris and I were talking about they couldn't pay him and they have so much depth. But Melton stood out in that Lakers game. We'll talk about the collapse later, but to your point, Embiid, Melton, stellar. I think James Harden had 12 dimes. So it's overall a good game up until. But Chris, what'd you think?
Yeah. I mean, like, Joel continues to just deserve all the credit in the world. Like, there are nitpicks that we can talk about defensively the past week or so with him, and since coming back from that injury. But overall, he's playing like an MVP. And if Philly is going to dig themselves out of the slight hole they've put themselves in, not much of a hole, they're above 500 now. It's not really a hole, so to speak, but if they're going to keep getting better, it's obviously going to be on Joel's shoulders, but he continues to just deserve a ton of credit. He's in the middle of the best offensive season of his career. He's somehow has improved on last year in that respect, which is pretty difficult to do. And yeah, Melton, we've talked about Melton on the pod time and time again. I've written about him. Just a really awesome player. And like Uriah said, we were talking about it before the show. And he's like, Memphis probably has to feel pretty bad about that move right now. And the Grizzlies have a ton of depth. They go 15, 16 deep with like real NBA players. And that's kind of the problem you run into when you have so many good players, is you can't pay them all. You can't roster them all. But I mean, Danny Green hasn't played yet. He might not play for a while, even though he's on track for a return this season. Like, what is he going to give Memphis? How confident are you in David Roddy as the number 23 pick? Like, Melton's an awesome game-changing player and the kind of like bench piece that Philly hasn't had in the past. I agree with you, Brian. He's probably going to move back to the bench once Tyrese gets back, but like come playoff time, it's hard to imagine him not playing, 30, 35 minutes a night. Unless PJ really turns it around offensively. I think Melton's going to be the guy closing a lot of those games for this team. And, who knows what will happen at the trade deadline? Things could change if they make a Tobias Harris move, which is, there's room for more minutes to open up for Melton that way too. So he's been awesome. His best game again of his career individually. Like you said, 33 points, 7 steals, 8 threes. Pretty historic stuff. So let's talk about that collapse. The last minute or so of this game was not very friendly to the Philadelphia 76ers. Pretty ugly stuff. Blew a 9-point lead in what felt like a handful of possessions. What was going through your mind when that was happening, Brian? What were your takeaways from that pretty nasty stretch of basketball from Philly?
I mean, after a while, it just stopped being aggravated and started being funny. Like, I mean, at a certain point, it's just like a comedy of errors that, it does, as much as we just praised Anthony Melton, he was responsible for 2 of the turnovers late in the game. So it does speak to, some of his limitations as a primary ball handler. And it speaks to why they really, really need Tyrese Maxey back, because he and Harden will be the ones handling the ball in those, late game kill the clock situations. I mean, they're lucky that they didn't lose in regulation. Like, Anthony Davis easily could have hit both of those free throws. It's just it's an incredible lack of discipline from this team. And, we even saw it at times throughout this Hornets game tonight. Like, yeah, they won by, 20 or whatever, but like the Hornets kept it close for most of the game. And this team refuses to put other bad teams away, which, is not typically the sign of a championship contender. So they've still got, close to 60 games to figure it out. And again, like, being without Tyrese Maxey, he's a huge piece of the puzzle. So I don't want to write the epitaph of the season already, but nothing I've seen so far, and especially with these kind of late game collapses or losing to the Hornets the other week, it's just hard for me to put this team on the same tier when, early going into the season, I feel like a lot of people thought Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, 1, 2, 3 in some order in the East. And Boston and Milwaukee have validated that. They are 1-2 with the bullet in the East. And I think the Sixers are more in that, like, they're in the next grouping for sure, but I'm not going to put them ahead of any other team definitively yet.
So when I look at that game, and I watched it again toward the end, and there's a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
If it was a pass that was thrown, and I think it was PJ or someone was trying to keep it in bounds, and Embiid was right under the rim. If that ball is like a foot over to the right, Embiid gets it, dunks it, and the game is out of reach. There's obviously what if Thibault didn't foul Reeves. That's boneheaded play on his part. And then obviously when AD got fouled, what if he hits that free throw? Like that, this would have been one of the worst losses in recent memory for the Sixers. But I found a stat, guys, and I'm showing off a little bit, Chris, for our guest, because I know Brian's a stat guy. So I'm looking at ESPN win probability, and they have this little chart. So you see like the 50% win probability going up and down, up and down. And I'm looking right now at the 4:05 minute in the fourth quarter. James Harden hit 17-foot pull-up jump shot. At that point, the game was 113-97 with 4:05 left in the game. The win probability percentage was 99.7%. And then you see the line just spike back up to 50%. And that is just such a clear indicator that the collapse was so dramatic. And I think Doc you could see his face when the foul happened and they were about to take the lead. You just see he was disgusted. And for me, Brian, you said it was funny. For me, I felt kind of uncomfortable. I was like, come on, these guys are professional basketball players and they can't get the ball in bounds.
Yeah.
But I think Doc is very, very fortunate because he would have been answering a lot of questions for subsequent weeks if they lost that one.
Yeah, I'm right there with both of you guys. Obviously, I guess I'm more with Brian in the fact that it's sort of comical at this point how poorly they handle themselves under pressure, and it's really easy to make Doc the quote-unquote scapegoat and to circle everything back to him. But like you said, Brian, this is the best team Joel's had around him, on paper at least. They've theoretically plugged several important holes as far as roster construction. Melton's playing out of his mind in this game. Tyrese absent. Granted, that's obviously a giant hole for this particular matchup, but like they continue to have the same problems with discipline and execution and effort. They play down to their opponents, like you said. They're really good at playing down or up to their opponent, whoever it may be, and that's, like you said, not generally a sign of a great basketball team. So they're very good. I agree they're in that next tier behind Boston and Milwaukee. They're pretty firmly behind Boston and Milwaukee, which is not where they wanted to be coming into the season. This game, that stretch, is just another example of it. You go around other podcasts, people talking about how they were pretty much ready to zone out. Like it seemed like Philly had things wrapped up. It should have been a very easy stroll to victory those last couple of minutes. They just find ways to muck it up. And like credit to the Lakers for fighting as hard as they did. That's a pretty good defensive team when they're locked in, and they have some obvious talent. Davis having a tremendous season. LeBron is LeBron. Like they deserve some credit. So that kind of segues into our next point here. But they're also now 10-15 on the season. So it's not a great team. But talking about the Lakers, Brian, now that we've seen them up close against Philly, I'm sure we've all seen plenty of them. They're still a very big national TV team because of their market. What do you think of that Lakers team? Again, 10-15 on the season. What's your impression of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see them competing for a championship this year, regardless of what they do. Like, I know one of the big stories is, do they trade Russ and one of their picks? Do they trade Russ and both of their picks? Do they trade for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner? Do they trade to, do the Utah trade? Do they trade for like Vucevic and DeRozan in Chicago? Seeing Anthony Davis play the way that he is and playing this way at center makes me wonder, like, did they really want Miles Turner and we're going to push AD back to the 4 when he's so clearly more effective at the 5? Like, I know he is reluctant to play this over the course of a full 82-game season, but at the same time, this is not 5 or 10 years ago where you have more physically imposing back to the basket centers. Even Joel, who is, one of the last remaining guys who used to play like that, he's even said, like, I'm not posting up anymore because teams just send doubles at me. I'm working at the elbow. I'm facing up more. So I don't think the wear and tear is there for AD anymore. So, like, if I'm the Lakers, it's tough because you don't want to waste this type of season from Anthony Davis, knowing he's turning 30 in early next year. I don't remember exactly when. LeBron's about to turn 38, I believe. And, Father Time is undefeated. It's going to win eventually, even if LeBron seems like a robot. So, at the same time, like, does a Russ for Hield and Turner trade, does that really put them on the level of Boston and Milwaukee? I don't think so. So I can understand their temptation to say, you know what, let's just give it a try this season. Maybe this leads to the official passing of the torch from LeBron to AD, and this is the new era. And now, we go into next summer. They could have upwards of like $30 million in cap space, and the only other teams projected to have a lot of cap space are, rebuilding or in some stages of a rebuild. So, Kyrie, I know, has been linked with them as a trade target, but also he'll be a free agent after this year. Does he take a slight discount? I'm almost scared to say this on this podcast, but if things go south here, James Harden is a free agent. Does he look at LA? Like there could be some marquee targets that they legitimately might be in play for. So, I think they'll be in the play-in mix. They dug out of, I think they were 2-10 to start the year, and then now they're back into that picture of, will at least be not the absolute worst team in the league. But the West is really deep. They're going to have to hope that a team like Utah in particular decides, where they're happy with this early season stretch, but they're also realistic and they want their shot at Wemby. So maybe they start selling off some pieces at the deadline. But I struggle to see this Lakers team compete for a championship, regardless of whether they make this big Russ blockbuster trade or not.
So I might have to take that clip and make it a short for our YouTube page of trading. You want to bring Russ here for Harden? Is that what you?
No. Harden, if he's a free agent this summer,
okay.
Yeah,
right.
and if for whatever reason the Sixers do not want to re-sign him, or if he's just they come in low on him, and the Lakers are there offering him $35 million. It's in the back of my mind as that is the one legitimate target. Houston has a ton of cap space too, so they could, if he really wants to go back there, they could pry him away. But otherwise, the Lakers, I think, are the real threat if you're looking ahead to James Harden free agency already.
Before I mention anything about Lakers players or their organization, I just want to take a shot at the Lakers fans who are just spotted throughout the Wells Fargo Center being annoying. The faker fans, not Laker fans, faker fans, they remind me of Dallas fans. Like wherever they just go, they pop up and they're visitors and they wear their jersey. And I will admit there were some really well-dressed fans at this game for obvious reasons, nationally televised. Lakers are big-time showtime. But anyway, let's get to the players. I agree with everything you said. I had in my notes to mention Miles Turner and Buddy Hield because I do think they would fit, in my opinion, because what they have right now is not working. They can't rely on Austin Reeves and Lonnie Walker to score the way they scored that night against the Sixers. And Hield would give them that. As far as the structure and fit, center, power forward between Turner and AD, I don't know. I mean, I'll take your word for it, Brian, because you cover more of the NBA than I do. But as far as LeBron, he's a cyborg. He's a freak of nature. AD is looking like he wants an MVP spot at the table in terms of being a candidate. But at the end of the day, they don't have the pieces to contend. And I'd be surprised if they even made the play-in.
Yeah, I'm right there with y'all. I just don't think LA has the pieces to contend this year. And it's, again, Anthony Davis is playing out of his mind. LeBron James is still a top 10 player in the NBA, a very, very good player. No one wants to write off LeBron James, but it's the pieces around them, and a lot of it's just mismanagement from Rob Pelinka and the guys in that front office, they just haven't put the pieces around them to be successful. And, whether they make a rush trade or not, again, it's very hard to imagine them getting the quality of pieces necessary to really turn the tide in that significant a fashion. Like DeMar DeRozan is still very good, but are you maximizing his skill set next to LeBron and Anthony Davis? You're not. And Vucevic, and you really don't want to put Vuce and AD together. I agree. That probably just takes away from AD more than it really helps your team. So those kinds of trades aren't just net positives all around. So I agree, Brian. Maybe the best move is to just write it out and focus on next season. But again, LeBron's 37 years old now. AD's getting older. Injuries have been a problem. I understand the other side of that coin is, can you really wait that long? So it's a tough situation to be in. But you're 10-15, and you're just clearly not a contender in the West. There's several much more well-rounded, cohesive teams in the West right now, and it doesn't feel like the Lakers are going to be able to get on that level anytime soon. So I guess it's a very frustrating spot to be in as a franchise, and they've kind of dug themselves into that hole. It's not really anything that has been out of their control. The injuries over the past couple of years have been unfortunate, but like AD is playing like prime Anthony Davis right now, and they're still 10-15. So yeah, it's just a tough spot to be in.
I would argue, though, before we move on to the Charlotte game, I know the Miles Turner fit because he doesn't really shoot that much, at least more than Vucevic. But with AD able to shoot the perimeter shot and Vucevic being able to stretch and go out, maybe that works. And Vuce will get you 12 boards a game, so AD doesn't have to worry about banging down low.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes them better than having Russ, right? I think it's an improvement, but I don't know if it's enough of an improvement to give up 2 first-round picks or to really – like that's the kind of thing you have to take into – you have to consider the future as well.
And Vuce is a defensive liability, to put it lightly. So, I think if you look ahead to the playoffs, there's a real chance that he wouldn't even be in their starting lineup, or at least like when you're closing late games down the stretch.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's transition. So the Sixers played tonight. We're recording on Sunday night. They played the Charlotte Hornets. Last time they played the Hornets, I think it was Thanksgiving Eve, and that didn't turn out really well, even though the Sixers had some injuries. The Sixers handled business at home, 131-113. And a few team stats before you guys go into the specific player stats. If I'm looking at the shooting field goal percentage, the Sixers really hit their shots. That was the distinction in the game. The Sixers made 55% of their shots, while Charlotte only made 40%. 3-point shots, they both made about the same number. The Sixers made 13 3-pointers. Charlotte made 11. Free throw line, there were a lot of fouls in this game. The refs did not swallow their whistle tonight. They just kept blowing the whistle. Rebounding, there was really no significant edge. Assists, the Sixers did have 10 more assists, 31-21. As far as points in the paint, the Sixers had a few more points in the paint, 56-50. The largest lead for the 76ers was 20, and Charlotte, the biggest lead they had in the first quarter was 8. So, Brian, let's start with the starters. Give us your take on how the Sixers starters did tonight.
Yeah, as it turns out, Joel Embiid is really good at basketball. This is the really deep analysis that you all come to this podcast for. But what can you even say? I mean, 53 points, 12 rebounds, 20 of 32 from the field. The difference between this game and the previous game is that Joel just knew, they have no one who can stop me. And again, it goes back to what he said against the Lakers the other night. It's almost like he came out just to send the message, I am just going to destroy these. Unless they figure out a way to stop me, I'm going to single-handedly destroy them. You guys just have to come along for the ride. I will drag you to the finish line in this game. Harden had 16 assists. I know he got sad at the end of the game because he finished 1 rebound shy of a triple-double, which was very funny. Really, the rest of the starters didn't have to do very much. It was just feed Joel and get out of the way. And, it is good. It's obviously great that Joel is this dominant and, can do this on a given night. I do worry sometimes that his individual greatness, it's almost like a cheat code for the Sixers, and like it's not necessarily going to work the same way in the playoffs that it does against a crappy Hornets team in the regular season. So if you're focusing on like building good habits for the playoffs, I don't know that this game was necessarily emblematic of that. With that said, they're just in a position right now where they need to stack wins to dig out of the early season hole that you guys mentioned. And, with the injuries that they had, like, when Tyrese Maxey comes back, then we could start building toward the playoffs. Right now, it's just survive in advance. So, I'm almost without words to look at. He is, I grew up watching Allen Iverson, and I will defend Allen Iverson until my dying day. Joel Embiid's the single most dominant Sixer I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say about it. This is his second 50-point game of the year already. He, again, as I mentioned earlier, is playing better offensive basketball for the most part than he did last season, which was one of the best offensive seasons we've seen in NBA history. And we're not for like 10 other very viable MVP candidates playing out of their mind right now. We'd probably be talking about Joel in the MVP race again. And we might be getting to that point anyways because of how good he is. Yeah, like you said, Brian, as far as building good habits for the playoffs, there's still some pretty valid concerns. I think James has been under a bit of a spotlight lately, especially because of that Lakers game and some of his stuff late. Still just a very good player, 19 points, 16 assists. I don't have a lot of complaints for him. He still clearly elevates this team in my mind. Of an inefficient game for Tobias. Melton had that nice run of threes in the second half. Like, not a lot to complain about as far as the starting five goes. And, Charlotte, if we're thinking about fun potential destinations for Wembanyama, I'd like to see LaMelo and Wemby play together. That'd be a lot of fun. So I'm glad they're trending in that direction. And yeah, a pretty convincing win for the most part for Philly. It wasn't, as much of a blowout as you would have liked throughout the meat of the game. Like you said, Brian, they kind of pulled away late, but it was never really in doubt, mainly because of how great Joel was. And yeah, I mean, they need wins. So any win's a good win in that sense.
Yeah, Joel Embiid, I'm going to pull a stat up, and I can't take credit for it because they flashed it on the screen during the game. So the fewest games played to reach 130-point, 10-rebound games since 1981-82. Joel Embiid broke that record. Shaquille O'Neal had that for quite some time. It only took Shaq 349 games. Embiid only took 346. So that tells you the greatness of Joel Hans Embiid. And it's funny, Brian, you mentioned Allen Iverson. I grew up watching AI too. And I was interviewed for KYW's Sports Fan of the Week for the Sixers. And Chris gave me a good quote. I appreciate that, Chris. But Dave Uram was interviewing me. And he's like, "Who's your favorite Sixer?" And I'm like, AI, Embiid. And then I just said, "Look, I'm leaning Embiid because we've never seen anything like him ever. No one, whether it's Wilt or Bill Russell, George Mikan, you go down any list of centers in the history of this game, Embiid is the only player to do what he's doing and doing it at a high level. And check this out, he didn't start playing until he's 16. I'm sure you know that. So imagine if Embiid had started earlier. So in basketball years, Embiid's probably like 25 right now when he's really 28, going on 29. So the greatness of Embiid was all over the screen tonight, albeit against Charlotte. But I have to agree that the whole idea of like good habits going into the postseason, not the best. Let's look at the bench because the role players, they need love too, right, guys? So, Brian, give us your assessment.
Yeah, I mean, Shake Milton, I'm just happy to see him still getting consistent minutes, even though James Harden is back. Again, no Tyrese Maxey, so we'll see what happens when they're at full strength. But I would hope that Milton's play while both Harden and Maxey were out should cement him a role in the rotation. They need as many ball handlers as they can get, frankly. And I think his play during that stretch was, merits him getting a real look in the rotation because, I know it feels like 3 years ago. But at the beginning of the season, he was not in the rotation. He barely played for the first. I think he had 4 DNPs in the first 5 games, and played like 6 minutes. I think it was against Indiana. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. The ongoing Montrez Paul Reed battle swung back to Montrez tonight. He played 13 minutes. Paul Reed only played 2. So
you're triggering Chris right now.
Yeah, man. I mean,
Chris is shaking his head.
I kid you not. I like half wrote a piece going into the season. I was like, Sixers have never had a better like backup option than they have this season, because they have just the versatility of Paul Reed some nights, Montrez some nights, PJ some nights. And now I didn't finish the piece. Like the season crept up on me, and now I'm like reworking it to like, they actually still have some unanswered questions at backup center for the 18th straight year. It is unreal how, in theory, they do have a lot of different options, and we really haven't seen the PJ at the 5 lineups all that much. They might be trying to save that for later in the season, or even just like, screw it, we'll practice it, and then we'll try it out in the playoffs, because we really don't want to put those miles on our 37-year-old body. But yeah, that's something I'm keeping an eye on. Like, does one of those guys really cement the, first crack at the backup job every night, or is it just like a matchup thing? And, I know last year, when DeAndre was still on the team, Doc was like, I like Paul against smaller bigs and DeAndre against bigger guys. So I wonder what what goes into his decision making when he is choosing between Paul Reed and Montrez on a given night. I know he said,
I'm just glad you didn't mention Paul Millsap, because I thought he was worse than DeAndre.
Yeah,
but anyway,
yeah. I mean, I know Doc has said he likes the offensive fit of Harrell and James Harden. So maybe now that Harden is back, maybe that's why Harrell is getting more minutes over Reed. But I think if you're looking ahead to the playoffs, we know how this story ends with Montrezl Harrell. I really think they need to just get Paul Reed up to speed as much as they possibly can. He has so much more defensive versatility, and he's going to make more mistakes. He's young, he's mistake prone, he is not as experienced as Montrezl Harrell, but like, that is what the regular season is for. So maybe they're going to like work their way up to be solidly top 6, and then the final third of the season, once that is not in jeopardy, that's when we really start to give Paul a longer leash. But I do hope we get to see more of him as the season goes on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, it seemed these past couple of weeks with Joel out that Paul was kind of starting to figure things out offensively. He was in the right place more often. He was figuring out his role as a guy who sets good screens, rolls to the rim, easy finishes. Like you said, like by the time the playoffs roll around, there's just going to be no reason to play Montrez. Like I think the biggest unanswered question at center is just, why is Doc continuing to not play Paul Reed? I mean, Reed's a very talented player. I have a lot of confidence in him personally as the guy who can be a full-time backup behind Joel. Montrez played well tonight. Like, this was a pretty rock solid Montrez Harrell game. It's not anything he did wrong in particular. He's played Charlotte quite well this season in their 2 matchups, but it's Charlotte, and for the most part, Reed has just straight about played Montrez at every turn, and I don't fully understand why we keep going back to him. I think Paul Reed should be playing. I think it's that simple in my book. Like you said, defensively, he's just such a really a very impressive playmaker on that side of the ball. He creates a lot of turnovers, and the way to get him to cut down on mistakes, the way to get him more comfortable in the offense, is to give him more reps with James and to give him more reps defensively. And I don't know, you're not really helping that by playing Montrez. So, yeah, I'm on Team Paul Reed here.
Yeah, I can't add anything else to the Paul Reed situation because you guys covered it all. I do want to say that George Niang tonight, it looked like he was coming off of an injury. He didn't have his best game. But before that, he was just hot. I mean, he's probably one of the most consistent bench players we've had. Shake Milton, I've been singing his praises, Brian, since I think his first season. I saw something in him his first season, and I the way he played, Brian, I was like, this kid belongs in this league. And he's going through a lot. He paid his dues with bottle pennies, G League, and waiting his turn. And once he got that, he capitalized on it. And I don't know if you see it, but now when he gets that ball, it's like his teammates recognize, okay, we're good with Shake. He can make some good moves, mid-range, driving to the lane. There was one game, not the Lakers game, the one before that, where top of the key, I think it was the Houston game, where top of the key, Harden passes the ball to Shake. No, Shake had the ball, passed it to Harden. Harden just gave right back to him. In other words, do something with it. And he did something. He scored. So I'm happy to see Shake blossom. I'm happy to see him develop. But as far as the Paul Reed thing, I will say this. Maybe we should write a letter to Doc. Say, Dear Doc, remember when you had no choice but to play Tyrese Maxey and see how he developed and took a nice leap? Maybe you should do that with Paul Reed because he's just waiting. You know what you're getting with Montrezl Harrell. Like a small center who can't play defense. At least Reed, who Chris, I think you told me this. He's in the top 3 of steals per 36 or something. Some ridiculous number that Reed is on defense. But I agree. I'm on team B-ball Paul. And with that being said, let's go ahead and go into the next topic.
All right, let's talk some more about James Harden now. This is just from ESPN, their stats page. Harden is now the 4th player in NBA history with 23,000 career points and 6,500 career assists. He joins Oscar Robinson, LeBron James, and Russell Westbrook. Pretty impressive company overall. Brian, where do you think Harden ranks all time on the list of point guards? Do we think he's in that top 10 range with guys like Magic and Nash, Stockton, again, Robertson, CP, Isaiah, Steph? Like where do we think? What tier? What range is James in all time? Do you think at the point guard?
Yeah,
spot?
I'm of the JJ Redick school of it's really hard to compare guys between generations, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've watched every Bob Cousy game or Walt Frazier game. Like I'm a little younger than that. So for me, it's more just thinking about where he ranks in this generation, or you can throw Darren Williams and J. Kidd and Steve Nash if you want, last 20 years. I think he absolutely belongs in that conversation. I think the way that he has changed his game over the years to, lean more into the playmaking. And, when he came to the league, he was more of a scorer. It was really the Houston, late career Houston when he really, really picked it up as a playmaker. And then, the Brooklyn, the short tenure in Brooklyn and now in Philly, that's more of his calling card, which is just wild to say for a guy who led the league in scoring for 3 straight years. So despite some of my frustrations with James and him not necessarily changing in the ways that I think will prolong his career even more, I think that shift has been positive from, primary scorer, number 1 focal option to, all right, this is the guy who's just going to set the offense up and generate easy baskets for his teammates.
Well, I am going to take that route of comparing eras. I don't mind being the bad guy here. And I guess I'm a little older than you. I'm 46. So I did grow up watching AI, but also saw Barkley in person. I saw Mo Cheeks. Isaiah Thomas is the reason why I became an NBA fan, even before Barkley. So if I look at that list that Chris read down, I didn't see Bob Cousy play. I mean, that guy, I think he's still alive, to be honest with you. I saw Stockton play. Amazing point guard. I mean, broke the record. No one has more assists in this league than him, but he did have Karl Malone on his team for 2 decades, right? So, and the one thing I would distinguish Harden and Stockton, obviously Harden's taller, a little bit more athletic, but anything that Stockton could do, Harden can do. But not everything that Harden does, Stockton could do. So I would rank him higher, and I know it's blasphemous for some NBA old heads, if I had a choice, I would rather have Harden than John Stockton. And I respect the heck out of John Stockton. I'm not taking anything away. But if we're being fair and comparative based upon skill set and capacity, look, Stockton could not lead the league in scoring and assists, which Harden did. And Harden had nobody on his team, right? So I would fit him on this top 10 list. Some of the other players that were mentioned, Oscar Robertson, I didn't see him play, but I mean, he's a beast. I mean, how many triple doubles did he have? Like, I can't even name it. I think Jason Kidd gets overlooked, guys, a lot because of, I guess, recency. Like Steve Nash, I think, is a top 10 point guard, but we can't forget about Jason Kidd and the other player, Steph Curry. I had an argument with someone about, is Steph Curry a real point guard? Is he a scoring guard? I guess I'm finally just going with it. Like, Steph is a point guard. He's a great passer. He has great handles. And even though it's not his primary purpose to distribute the basketball, he can. So I would say Harden is in the top 10. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as Bryan, as being a relatively younger person who hasn't watched many Bob Cousy games. But, I mean, even if we are just isolating it to this era, like, Steph is the obvious number one guy on point guard. It's Steph Curry and then everyone else. But once you get past Steph, I mean, a lot has been said the past couple of years about Harden ball and whether or not it's effective, and they always bow out in the playoffs. Like, had Golden State not reached their peak with Kevin Durant when they did, Houston would have won a championship or two. So I always kind of bump back against that particular line of criticism because, statistically speaking, Houston was one of the best offensive teams, if not the best offensive team we've ever seen for a few years there. Harden ball worked, and Chris Paul was part of that, and Clint Capella and all the other guys. Like, they built a successful ecosystem around James. But James is at the center, and he was extremely productive, as you said, Bryan. We have really never seen anyone put up those numbers in the way that James did with his kind of shot distribution and efficiency. And yeah, so, like, once I get past Steph, even if we're moving it to the past 20 years, like Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, those guys, I think James has a pretty strong case to be on that level in, like, just offensive players from this generation. Steph, LeBron, KD, I think James is, like, right up there with him, like in that tier of offensive talent, and maybe not so much defensively. That's maybe where he lags behind in the all-time, debate. But I do think the case for James, top 10 or whatever at his position all time, would be pretty strong. And especially recent, like past 20 years, pretty easily a top 5 point guard, in my opinion. Maybe top 2 or 3. Like, I think that's the kind of talent we're talking about. And he's transitioning into the next phase of his career. That's not the player that's playing for Philly right now. Like, peak James Harden is not around. He's changing, as you said, Bryan. But as far as career achievements, I'd be pretty hard-pressed to keep Harden out of my top 10 or whatever, I'm sure, if I went through things, just because the numbers are insane. And Houston, despite not winning a championship, was one of the best offenses we've ever seen, mostly because of James Harden. So I think he deserves a ton of credit.
So this part of the conversation just put a smile on my face because it just dawned on me, like, we got James Harden for Ben Simmons. That just puts a smile on my face. I know this topic's going to put a smile on Chris's face. Go ahead, take it away, man.
All you. This is you.
Oh, this is me? Oh,
yeah.
My God. It's twice I've dropped the ball tonight. My bad. Actually, you know what? I put this as the introduction for me to introduce this one because he knows everything about all international players. Like, he is the expert on it. I am not. But the next topic is we're going to talk about a surge in the NBA of elite international players. I'm looking at a photograph right now. Cropped together, we have Jokic, we have Embiid, we have Giannis, and then we have Luka Doncic. I mean, what a quartet of amazing players right now. So my question to you guys, and obviously, Bryan, will go to you first. Are the best players in the world, not just NBA, but are the best players in the world right now, are they all from the outside the United States? And if you believe so, what do you think has caused this surge of elite play from international guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'd put Kevin Durant in that mix. I'd put, LeBron probably a little bit below now, which is just weird to say that he's outside of the top five. I'd put Steph in that mix. So, whether you have either of those guys over any of Luka, Embiid, Jokic, that's whatever. Like, they're all top five-ish, top six players. But, I think it's a couple things. One, I think scouting is just a lot better than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Like you just mentioned, Joel Embiid didn't pick up a basketball until he was 16 years old. Who's to say in 1990 that a scout would have been in Cameroon to see this guy pick up a basketball and be like, wow, this 7-footer, he's got the skills of a soccer star, and like maybe he could translate that to a basketball court. Let's develop him. Let's work him through the system. I just don't think that framework was there 20 or 30 years ago. My podcast co-host is actually from Denmark, so he would be the first to go on this topic for as long as you guys wanted. But I think you'd also point to the differences in AAU play versus international play, where, I think AAU play tends to favor some of the like flashy individual isolation play. Whereas, international, they're more team oriented. They're working on passing more. They're working on their dribbling more. They're becoming more well-rounded basketball players rather than just like isolation and one guys. And I think, also this is like very nerdy, but I used to write about high school sports way back when. I know like single sport specialization is a topic in that sphere where, if guys are just playing year round, it actually doesn't help them. Like it's better athletically for you to dabble in a bunch of different sports when you're young before you start to really focus on one. So, I think that's when you look at Embiid in particular, like his footwork is just so unique for a 7-footer. And it's because he played soccer for as long as he did. I think his dad is a volleyball star, if I remember correctly. So like he's been exposed to a bunch of different sports. I'd imagine probably similar story for a lot of these international guys. Whereas, in the United States, it's like once you start to show any semblance of talent, you just get funneled into the system where it's like, all right, we're gonna play basketball year round. We're gonna, like I know LeBron has expressed some concern about it. I think Mark Stein had a Substack post about this recently where he's like, these kids are just playing too damn much. Like we need to tamp this back a bit, or they're not going to have any tread left on their tires when they even get to the NBA. So I'm guessing it's a combination of all those factors, but I think the scouting is probably the big one.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. I think you hit a lot of the points that I would have hit, and probably more eloquently, Brian. Yeah, I mean, if we look at the four players you mentioned, Uriah, Jokic, Embiid, Luka, Giannis, there's a pretty credible argument that those are the four best players in the NBA. Just like pretty much a fact at this point. I think Steph and KD are in the mix too, like you said, Brian. But I mean, not to commit blasphemy on the pod, but I'd at least be pretty comfortable saying like Giannis is number one, straight up. And Jokic is probably pretty concrete number two right now. Luka's kind of like on a straight line up, though. Joel's obviously very good as well. Like, those are four amazing players. Joel's the only one who even like played college ball in the U.S. The other three were scouted and developed entirely overseas. And like you said, it's infrastructure. Credit to the NBA and NBA teams for recognizing this trend and the talent pool that's out there and making the moves necessary to go out and see these players. Some of it you can probably chalk up to like modern technology, because in 1980 we just wouldn't have had easily accessible video cameras in Giannis's high school gym in Greece or whatever. Like that's part of it too. It's just it's easier to pass this stuff around, to see guys play live even if you're not there. So there are a lot of factors at play, but this trend is going to continue. Wembanyama is about to be the number one pick. Luka should have been the number one pick. Like, we're seeing more and more of these elite level prospects coming from overseas, and that's just not going to stop, because as big as America is, it's a very small fraction of the world's population. So there are a lot of really talented athletes not from this country, and we're just going to find more and more of them as this infrastructure continues to grow. So, yeah.
So I read a book. I read a book this summer. I was tutoring a young man in high school, and we were reading a book together. And because sports are his thing, and a lot of guys growing up, high school boys, they're not really into reading. They're into sports and video games and stuff. So it's like I was paid to read the book with him and give him questions related to the plot. And I'm so glad I read it. Here's why. I wish I could remember the name of it. but it was about Michigan State team playing in the championship. And the book took place in like the fourth quarter throughout the whole book. And what they did was they would go back in time to get to know the two protagonists. One was from Croatia, this European player who was playing on Michigan State. And then, he's playing for a team called Troy. My bad. Michigan State had a kid from Michigan, grew up in a really rough area, rough neighborhood. But the author, he did this on purpose. He made the international player flesh out his life story as like writing journals. So you're reading this journal first person, and he came from a war-torn country. And I think that's so indicative of, I guess, the landscape of the playing field of young players coming into the NBA today is because it's international. You don't just have kids from like North Philly or Compton or, a rough neighborhood in the Bronx making it to the NBA. Now you have guys from overseas who also grow up in poverty, war-torn situations, and they too have something to prove, which to everything you guys added, I think you're seeing that now more from, I guess, a social aspect. And, it just shows you that no matter where you're from, you can make it if you work hard and you play the game the right way. So I thought I would add that. And the one other thing I'll say is, I'll take you guys back to the 90s. There was a player called Drazen Petrovic. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. Assassin, crazy skill, amazing shooter. Got rest in his soul, died in a car accident. Sarunas Marciulionis played for Golden State. Wasn't just a role player. He played with Golden State, Tim Hardaway, Chris Mullin. He was averaging like 18 points a game. And then the last one, Chris will like this, Arvydas Sabonis, the father of Domantas Sabonis. So these international players, every decade, like, their fathers are having kids and they're just following their footsteps. So you guys mentioned Wembanyama. This is the last topic of the night. This is a great conversation. But Rudy Gobert always likes to draw a little controversy towards him. Rudy Gobert said, and this is from the Athletics' Joe Varden, got this quote from him. They were talking about the possibility of Joel Embiid playing for Team France in the future, along with Gobert and obviously Victor Wembanyama, basically saying that Gobert saying that they'd be unstoppable. Guys, what do we think about this? Is this Gobert just jumping off at the mouth, or what do you guys think?
I mean, have we not seen how the double big lineup has worked with Gobert in Minnesota this year? Is Gobert coming off the bench in this scenario? Because then I might be willing to entertain a dominant France team. But no, Wemby is incredible. If he's going to be the number one pick for very good reason, pair him with Embiid. That's just so much length. You're going to have to you're not getting in the paint against those guys. You're just going to have to outshoot them from three. And, the American bigs, it's pretty bleak. It's like Bam and Jarrett Allen, and probably the two best bets for who would be sending to go against them. So, Embiid in particular would definitely try to assert himself on the other end as well. But yeah, the Gobert fit is not necessarily as seamless. I think Gobert might have to be careful for what he wishes for if he wants to keep that starting lineup spot.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I will say, with international basketball, those bigger, slower lineups tend to be more successful. It is a different kind of game over there, but you're right. If Joel decides to play for France, specifically, he would kind of be spurning Team USA because he could turn around and choose to play for Team USA as well, right? So, like you said, USA doesn't have a ton of other great options of that caliber at the center position, and Gobert and Wemby are very talented players. Like, that would definitely elevate France to another level in those conversations. Are they going to beat Team USA at the Olympics? Maybe not, but as far as, every other team, they'd be in the mix. And Team USA, as we know, is not unbeatable by any stretch. So they'd certainly be in the conversation. I'm probably higher on Gobert than Uriah and other members of this podcast, but you're right. Bit. Gobert, Wembanyama, and Embiid in the same lineup, you're kind of pushing it a bit as far as perimeter defense goes. But no matter how you stagger it, they're going to have a pretty dominant interior defense and a pretty strong foundation offensively to build on. So it'd be a very compelling group, if nothing else.
It would be tough for any team to get a shot off when you have a 7-2, a 7-6, and an Embiid. But the star of that team would be Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot. He would be the star of that team. TLC, he'd step up. He'd average, I don't know, like 30 a game. I don't know. But I'm not going to add anything to that. I was getting a little late. And what I wanted to say in the beginning, but the music kind of threw me off, Brian, with my intro, was applauding your research. I know it's not the most fun thing to do, but the way I see Brian when I first read his stuff is like the way you break down stats. It's like the average NBA fan when they're trying to figure out stats, they're like looking at it like algebra in middle school, and you're out there like putting it in, like looking at it like calculus, but you serve it back to us in a way that's easily understood. So just want to send some appreciation your way for that, and for I follow you on Twitter. You posted or retweeted something from Howard Beck, who I've read before, but I just never followed him. But he wrote a really good article on the parity of the NBA. So thank you for that. That article.
Yeah, Beck used to be with us at BR for a number of years, so I had the pleasure of editing him for a while. He's now at Sports Illustrated, one of the best NBA writers out there. So if any of you are not following Howard Beck, please do so. You can finally understand the What Up Becks on the Low Post podcast, if nothing else. But yeah, thank you guys for having me. If you want to distract yourself from the Sixers' somewhat depressing short-term future, I have some stuff going up on Liberty Ballers this week about their long-term cap outlook and, looking way far ahead. The new CBA is coming down soon. They just announced that there's going to be a delay in the opt-out deadline, which is supposed to be on December 15th. So I'm going to break down why Sixers fans should want a new CBA after this year. And then also the NBA is proposing this quote-unquote upper spending limit, also known as a hard cap. So I'm going to write a very, very hypothetical piece about how that might affect the Sixers as well.
Cool. Awesome. I think we'll use that clip for our
nice.
Short. We'll use that one, and not get rid of Harden for Russ.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're at the end of the road, gentlemen. Brian, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. This is great. We'd love to have you on again in the future.
Anytime, guys. Happy to come, and thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning into the Sixer Sense podcast. We are on YouTube now, for those who don't know, so like, subscribe, follow along there. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you can read us on the internet, listen to us on the internet at thesixersense.com. And you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at SixerSense. So until later this week, everyone, peace out and go Sixers.